Welcome to another edition of The Hub, where we talk all things politics on Guam. I'd like to introduce our guest for this week. We have Chirag Bhojwani, who is the Executive Director of the Democratic Party of Guam, Dr. Ron McNinch of the University of Guam, and of course, our regular guest, the Chairman of the Republican Party of Guam, Mr. Juan Carlos Benitez. Thanks for joining us, gentlemen. Okay, let's start right off with the session this afternoon. One of the things that are going to be voting on is the Bill 11-36, which was vetoed by the governor. It would basically require the governor, had she signed it, to go to the legislature for authorization to extend public health emergency after the first 2 months. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that, and whether you or not you think it's going to be overridden today. And let me start with you, Chirag.
Thank you, Nestor. The public health emergency, throughout the public health emergency, it's allowed our government to respond to the spikes in COVID. We've had, in addition to being able to respond to COVID, some of the things we were able to do is we were able to grant 1,000 temporary work permits for healthcare workers. 92 of them were doctors, and as of today, 55 of them are still, actively serving our community. It also allows us to receive supplemental SNAP funding, which benefits 12,000 households on Guam. There have been $27 million that have been afforded to Guam because of the state of public health emergency. And throughout the public health emergency, we only used emergency procurement twice, to my knowledge. One was for the hotels, and the other was for the procurement of fire trucks. Now, if you want to compare apples to apples, Governor Camacho, he declared 78 declarations of emergencies, from fixing a library, GMH, dealing with the OR.DUM and Department of Corrections, the Fire Department, Public Works, and the OPA audit that was released that audited his emergency powers. It allowed him to skirt procurement regulations and ultimately brought Guam to the deficit that we inherited, and we thankfully brought down to zero. So, and you look around today, everything's back open, but you look at Guam's primary industry, tourism. Tourism has thankfully started to pick up, and we see the numbers, you see our tourists coming in, but we still need some flexibility to improve our destination and also help our only economic driver that is still hurting. So we're still doing what we can to deal with COVID. I know the talking point from Senator Duenas was President Biden saying COVID is over.
Pandemic's over, yeah.
But as we all know, the White House has walked back that statement, and I think it's more of a figure of speech. COVID's over, but just every day you read the daily COVID reports, people are still getting hospitalized. People are still getting sick. People are still dying. So have we come a long way? Of course. But is it still in our community? And is it still rapidly evolving and changing? I would say yes. And thankfully, everybody in our community, Democrats, Republicans, male, female, we've all done our part, gotten vaccinated. We've all adapted to this new norm of, using your hand sanitizer more often, being more cautious wherever you go. So has it improved? Yes, and it has improved thanks to everybody in the community. But is it still here? Of course, you can't discount the fact that it's not here.
All right, let me bring in Juan Carlos now. The Republican Party has come out in support of an override this afternoon. Tell us your side of this issue.
Sure, absolutely. Even the governor has come out publicly and said, we're not exercising any of these powers, and those restrictions have all been lifted. Then why are we keeping an emergency? Emergency powers are for emergency situations, not for prolonged multi-year systems that have been created. You did bring about the SNAP program. I think maybe it's hard to research, but here's a proclamation from Hawaii by the Democratic governor of Hawaii. I want to provide copies to all of you. So you can see it just on the SNAP program. We've told the governor, if the issue is a SNAP program, just follow what Hawaii did. They eliminated the emergency declaration, kept it just for this one program, for this one benefit that is still needed in Hawaii. It's needed here. We have no problem with that. What we have problem is with trying to circumvent our procurement process to eliminate transparency, to make sure that the open public laws of Guam are not followed because you're supposed to in an emergency. Look, I work with Catholic Social Services. I go in, we submit for our RFP. Then they cancel the RFP. Then we submit again for the next RFP. They cancel the RFP, and then they say emergency power. We're going to give you the contract. We're extending it to emergency power. I don't want to do it through emergency power. I want to do it through the regular procurement process that we're doing. So it's interesting that you say that they're not doing emergency procurement. They are, and whoever told you they're not is wrong. Reality is there's no reason. There's no reason today that we're not outside of this emergency procurement. We have 50 states in this nation. 40 of them have already announced that they ended the pandemic. The other 9 out of the other 10 have announced that they're ending it at the end of next month. So what are we waiting for? No one's wearing a mask around. Now you walk around, the only place they're forcing you to wear a mask is every time I go to the pharmacy.
The Catholic Social Services incident, you can still procure through an emergency without a public health emergency. And also, as far as I know, the open government law is still being practiced everywhere. Every meeting is broadcasted online. Everything is publicly noticed. And, with regards to Hawaii, the Family First Coronavirus Response Act, Section 2302, states that in the event of a public health emergency declaration based on an outbreak of coronavirus disease 2019 and the issuance of an emergency or disaster declaration by a state based on an outbreak of COVID-19, that's what you need to qualify for the extra funding. On Guam, this emergency allotment provides over $2 million in cumulative monthly assistance to over 15,000 households. Now, if you want to find the $2 million for us, but be my guest, and I'm sure we can entertain
just
it.
Follow their same process. Just do the same executive order they do. Take where it says Hawaii, put Guam, and be fine with it. I see no problem on why is it so complicated that we can't do it. In the issue of transparency, if we pass Bill 11, for 60 days, it doesn't make any difference. In reality, is we're all expecting after the election, this pandemic will be closed when Felix Camacho becomes governor. Number two, all it requires after those first 60 days, there needs to be some public notice. People will provide comments and say, hey, do we really need to continue this pandemic or this emergency extended to an additional 30 days? If it's a new issue that happens, for any new issue or concern that you can do a brand new executive order for calling an emergency. I don't see any problem why it doesn't pass outside of the fact that this governor doesn't want it.
Let me ask Ron. Ron, are there any political implications or is there any political fallout for continuing with the public health emergency?
First off, you're always putting me in the middle between these two guys, okay?
That's your job.
I'm stuck in the middle with the rest of the public here. If I had it my way, we wouldn't pass any laws within 100 days of the election. That's the bottom line, because all this is political nonsense. Why didn't we have this bill a year ago? Why wasn't it done that long ago? That's when it probably should have been done.
Actually, it was, wasn't it? And then it has been vetoed, and then it has been
That's my point.
attempted to be.
Why,
this will be the fourth time they
now?
will attempt to override.
Why is it bubbling up right before the election and everything else? And so I think the public's going to get tired of this nonsense. Only if the governor calls them into special session to do laws within 100 days of the election. That'd be my opinion.
Yeah, what's your gut? Is the override going to succeed, or?
It very well could happen, but I don't think so. But it could happen. It's one of those, like I'm stuck in the middle. You need 10. And so the question is, there's some departing Democrats that could just say, forget it, and let's parting shot do it. But then they have some bills they want to get passed by the governor, and so lex talionis, which is the law of retaliation, the governor wouldn't approve their bills if they did that. And so I don't think it'll pass.
All right, we'll know at around 4 o'clock today. I think that's when the legislature will convene, and that's one of the items that they'll be voting on. Let's move on. The admiral appeared at the Guam Chamber of Commerce this week and announced that for the next 7 years, there will be on average $1.2 billion to $2 billion in military construction spending. And I'm wondering, from each party's perspective, what your thoughts are on that. And let me start with you, Juan Carlos.
So I think it's great news. Little bit of concern. I don't know if the actual construction industry in Guam is strong enough to absorb that entire amount now. The numbers we were getting till now is a number that was easily taken care of by local companies, so most of the money stayed locally. And so we'll see where it goes, but I'm excited that we're still moving forward. This is our strongest leg of our economy. Without it, we would be in a complete disastrous area. Chirag mentioned tourism industry. For next year, we're expecting around 100,000 tourists. That's a number we get in 1 month in 2019. So it's going to take time for the economic recovery on tourism industry unless we figure a different way to address the concerns. And I have not seen that under this administration. And we need to rely on Department of Defense and make sure that this money not only is assigned to Guam, but is actually expanded and the buildup continues to be built.
Yeah, Chirag?
Well, to that point, 1.2 billion to 2 billion a year, my friend Juan Carlos and his party, they love talking about cutting the BPT, but under the Democrat leadership of Speaker Terlahi, Vice Speaker Munya Barnes, Chairman Sonagston, we cut the BPT from 5 to 3% for 90% of Guam's businesses who make less than $500,000 a year. Now, when you talk about the buildup, you take a conservative estimate of the conservative 1.2 billion, 5% BPT of that is $60 million a year. 3% of that is 36 million. If you lower the BPT for these multi-million-dollar contracts that would be paying into Guam, you'd be losing anywhere from 24 million to 40 million a year. And over 7 years, it's 168 million to 280 million. I think it would bring much-needed resources to Guam. And the Committee on the Guam Buildup and Public Accountability, Vice Speaker Munya Barnes did write to the public auditor, and we did some research on usaspend.gov and saw the contracts that were awarded for work done on Guam. It had the contractor, the dollar amount, and we asked the OPA to go look at whether or not those taxes are actually being paid here on Guam. So he's currently doing that audit, but over 7 years, anywhere from 168 million to 280 million, the GOP loves to talk about crime, drugs, and all kinds of other problems in between. That money is going to definitely solve a lot of these problems. It would go a long way at hiring rehab professionals, hiring much needed law enforcement. I recently went through rehab, and I had a really awesome counselor. He has a master's degree and multiple certifications in substance abuse. But he shared with me that as soon as he's done with his pro-tech requirement, he's going to go look for another job in his same field for the federal government that pays him 3-4 times more. So we need to, as the cost of living is going up, as the workload is going up, we need to adequately compensate these much needed workers that we have to serve our community. And I think 168 million to 280 million would go a long ways at solving that problem.
Ron, with all these billions of military dollars flowing into Guam over the next 7 or so years, does that change the dynamic between the military here and the local government?
Well, first I wanted to say I'd like to thank Chirag for sharing his rehab story, and I think it's good for our families and community to have those kinds of open discussions, and I applaud you, Chirag. On the military, God bless America, God bless Guam, God bless our U.S. military and our veterans. You know what? We ask people all the time, what do you think of the military? Civil military affairs, we study it all the time in our polling. And you know what people say? We wish the local government would communicate better with the military. And they say, how could the military do better? We wish the military could communicate better with our local government. And that's what the people view on the military government thing is, are they communicating? Are they working together? And then the other thing is just how positive our community views the military here. People have a very positive view of the U.S. military. Absolutely. It's not this artificial, we hate the military. Not at all. When we look at the public and you listen to the public and you do polling on it, it's very positive.
And do you think that this will change the emphasis of the next congressional delegate, be it Jim Moylan or be it Speaker Juan Pat? Go ahead, whoever wants to.
I think the discussion nationally and internationally is right now on the rise of China. We've seen what happens when a rogue nation kind of decides to wake up one day and go invade a country. we don't want that to happen to Taiwan, and should that happen, it's right in our backyard. So I think there's the evolving threats in the region and also the encroachment of China right here in our backyard, in the CNMI, in the FSM. You see videos being circulated on social media of people coming off boats and washing up on Guam shores. And, Juan Carlos knows this. That's what brought him to this part of the world with the DOJ. This has been going on for so long, and I think now it's finally being put in the right perspective. And as you see our governors in DC right now at the Pacific Island Country Summit, this is a conversation that, regardless if you're Democrat or Republican, this is something that's of significant interest to Americans and, honestly, citizens of the world, people who live in the Pacific, people who live in Asia.
Yeah. The question was, do you think this should shift the focus of the next congressional delegate?
I absolutely think that you will not get a better congressman for Guam than Jim Moylan. He's wore the uniform. He's committed to serve in the Armed Services Committee and serve as a voice that can translate the concerns of Guam to the folks not only in the military but also in that committee. He's also going to be a congressman that's not going to be going to the UN and calling the military government as an imperialistic power, or he's going to be arguing about whether they should be here or not. He's committed. Guam's part of America. We're moving forward, and we need to be united in the way that we look at things and make sure that it's a one Guam strategy. That was a concept that was brought in the original build-up under Felix Camacho, and we continued through it with the changes that was done under Governor Calvo. We need to look at this build-up as it impacts the entire island, not just inside of the fence, and forget about us in the outside.
All right, we'll get to you in a minute, Ron. We got to go to a break. We'll be back with more of the hotspot right after this. All right, we are back, and we'll continue our discussion really briefly on the delegate question. Go ahead, Ron.
Thank you, Nestor. First, I wish Madeline Bordallo were running again. Okay, that's my preferred candidate. And by the way, I want to tell both the Republicans and the Democrats, this is the lowest energy delegate race I've ever seen. I want to see some more action going on. There's nothing going on.
Yeah. What kind of action you talking about?
I want to see some debate. I want to see some contrast.
Yeah.
That's
You don't think that there's any contrast at this point? No,
there's
really?
nothing going on. This should be WWF for Washington, D.C.
I think the contrast is pretty apparent. One is a workhorse and the other's a show horse. One has served for ages.
You want to refer to Judy as a show horse?
No, workhorse. I started my career with her. She mentored me, and that's how I got into politics. And one thing I can say about Speaker Wampat is she comes to work before any of her staff, and she leaves after all of them. She's there on Saturdays, and just last week she was in D.C. meeting with members of the Armed Services Committee, members of the Natural Resources Committee. She didn't even wait for the election to start networking and said, I want to be in that committee, and she met all the chairmen.
But don't you think that it's weird that she waited to this stage of the process to start going to Washington to meet people? I think we need a congressman that already knows those folks and has a relationship with that leadership. Jim Moylan has been doing this for a couple of years. We've been working, going to D.C., meeting with the folks in Washington, organizing and structuring the efforts that we're going to do once he wins this election. You're going at the last minute, and you're going, I want a photo up with somebody so I can put it on my page so I know D.C. Come on.
I don't think it was a photo op. It was a continuation of the close working relationship she's had with all these stakeholders in D.C. I know when I worked at Interior, Speaker Wampat has continuously held meetings, sent emails back and forth, and unfortunately for Senator Moylan, the guy he knows in D.C. is no longer in Congress.
All right, let's move on. Speaking of Congress,
last time I thought McCarthy was going to become the Speaker of the House in this upcoming election. So, and they know him very well.
Polling data I saw today has Democrats leading to keep Congress.
All right. Speaking of national politics, as I mentioned, there is a concluding U.S. First ever U.S. Pacific country summit called by President Biden. Governor Leon Guerrero is there as an observer for the the U.S. Delegation, and our good friends and neighbors from the FSM, the Marshalls, the Republic of Palau are also there, along with 12 or 13 other Pacific Island countries. Pretty significant, do you think? Let's start with you, Chirag.
I think so. For the longest time, our federal stakeholders, when they try to deal with territorial issues, as it relates to Guam, it's kind of unique and a nuance. They always see us as this forgotten stepchild, and now, thanks to the work of this Governor Leon Guerrero and Carlotta Leon Guerrero, Vera Tapasnia, and our partners at JRM, we're kind of making the case to our federal stakeholders that, we're the prodigal child you forgot we had, or you forgot you had. And so they see that we are what they need to keep their hegemony in the Pacific and in the world, and they notice that, they realize that, and it was more than just political theory, it was action, as you saw with Teddy Roosevelt, as you saw with COVID. We showed up, we rolled up our sleeves, and it's a commitment of not only the administration, but the entire people of Guam as it relates to our relationship with the federal government. So Governor Leon Guerrero being invited to the table to be a part of the discussion and also share her perspectives on everything, I think it's important that we have that voice of Pacific Islander at the table.
Juan Carlos, your thoughts on the significance of this U.S. Pacific Country Islands Summit?
Yeah, it's. I didn't realize this was an effort that was driven by the governor of Guam. I actually thought that was a process that was started under the Trump administration when we had the first meeting ever at the White House of the presidents of the freely associated countries. And if we want to be more specific, it's reactionary. We're reacting to what China has influenced in this region, and we're catching up. When you look at this administration, it took 2 letters from the Senate Armed Services Committee asking them to appoint as Assistant Secretary for Insular Affairs and asking them to appoint a negotiator for the Compacts of Free Association. And then a 3rd letter asking them to move forward with the compact because it was taking too long and they didn't see any form of progress moving forward. I think I forwarded you one of the letters. It's a great thing that it's happening. This is something that needs to be a continued process as we move forward. But Guam, Northern Mariana Islands, American Samoa need to be more than just observers. They need to be part of the delegation with full authority of participation in, because this is not compact negotiations. This is more a regional meeting and how we move forward through the region. They are mentioning the importance of doing the compact negotiations. It was one of the talking points by the president. I was disappointed he did not mention Guam in his speech or at any part in the process. I wish he would have. I applaud the governor for going and participating. Her task is going to be a tough one, but she needs to move forward. But when we look at the summit, they're looking how to spend money that cannot directly go into Guam. They're talking about the billions of dollars that the federal government implements. It's APEC money, Asia Pacific Island Conference, is ASEAN conference funding, is what is called the Asian Development Bank funding. So they're trying to identify how do we work together and get these forms of funding to work and benefit these Pacific Island countries so that they're more comfortable and happier to be part of America and staying in our sphere of influence versus going to China that's paying for the school to older children. Full rights into Beijing going on every day. So when you look at that, it is a more expansive process. It's interesting to see one reaction that we saw already from the Biden administration. They took the funding for the Compacts of Free Association out of the Department of Interior. They have put that funding now in the Department of State. We'll see if Congress agrees to that or not. I do like the appointment of Carmen Cantor, Ambassador Cantor, to be the Assistant Secretary for Insular Affairs. I think that was a great move. Ambassador, I'm going to pronounce his name, I think it's Wu, as the head of the Compacts of Free Association. He has a great reputation in D.C.
You're speaking of the negotiator.
Yes.
Yeah, John Yu.
Yu.
Yeah.
And he has a great reputation in D.C. So I think we have 2 good people doing there. I think this conference is an effect of that. What role will Guam get and how we'll move forward will be interesting to see. with Jim Moylan in Congress and with Governor Felix Camacho going forward, I would advocate that the next conference should be in Guam. If we're so important and we're the center of this going on, the negotiations should be here.
I just want to add one thing real quick. The federal government finally realizes Guam is the missing piece to make this work, and that's essentially why the governor sat right next to the Secretary of State throughout this whole thing. Over the last few months, we've been able to meet with numerous CODELs. Just next week, there's a CODEL coming into Guam from the House Appropriations Committee, specifically the subcommittee for military construction and Veterans Affairs. They know it's what they need. They're coming here, they're seeing it firsthand, and it's all finally coming together. I think Ambassador Cantor as Assistant Secretary would be great. The one thing I have to say, though, is, the Office of Insular Affairs has nothing to do with Puerto Rico. I wish we had somebody from our part of the world to represent our interests that knows our islands. But regardless of that, Ambassador Cantor has gone out of her way to really know the region and do her best to advocate for it. She did that as ambassador of the U.S. to the FSM.
Okay.
And she spent 8 months here in Guam, which was great. She moved the entire embassy to Guam.
She was stuck here during the pandemic. Yeah, I remember that. All right, we're going to get to you, Ron. We're going to talk more about this summit, which I think is a very significant event, right after this break. Please stay with us. All right, we are back, and we're going to continue our discussion of the Pacific Summit. Ron, go ahead. What are your thoughts?
Thank you, Nestor. Hawaii's the most isolated island group in the world. Way up in the North Pacific, the U.S. treats them like they're the center of the island universe. They're so isolated. I hope somebody in the U.S. studies a little geography. Guam's at the center. We're at the hub of the big wheel here. And we should take on our role right here ourselves. We should be the leaders on this, and we should volunteer to be the leaders. We should make more interactions with these island governments. We don't really do that. We need to try to do it more. And I'm very pleased to see that our local leaders are trying to do that, and traditionally they have through the APIL and other groups, but we can do more. We can do more at all levels.
Yeah. Juan Carlos mentioned the Compacts of Free Association and Ambassador Yu, who is in charge of negotiating that, and he said on another forum that he expects to get that done by the end of this year, and President Biden mentioned that during his speech today at the summit. What are your thoughts on how the freely associated states are going through these negotiations and leveraging, what is, as Juan Carlos also mentioned, the response to Chinese overtures in our region?
I think the Pacific Island nations, our brothers and sisters in Micronesia, are doing the right thing by leveraging their importance in this region, and they, just like Guam, know that they're what America needs to keep their dominance in this part of the world. So negotiating a lot of these things, and with every compact, it's not let's go re-sign the same thing and extend it. That's not even a question. That's something America and the COFA states have said we're definitely doing it. But part of the thing that I appreciate that it's taking this long is they're going through it thoroughly. They're looking at what they could have improved from the last compact, and as every compact comes out, it evolves and it becomes a lot better. Tony actually negotiated the last compact, and I've heard some of the challenges that he had to go through, and sometimes with a lot of these agreements you gotta get creative and think outside the box on how to deliver on a commitment that both parties they want to deliver for their citizens and for defense purposes. It's just how to navigate all of that sometimes gets a little tricky.
All right, we got to take a real quick break, and I know you have a response to this, and I'll get to you, and you're going to close out the show with that. We'll be right back.
This year, we're expanding our Decision 2022 platform to include comprehensive coverage of the election in the Northern Marianas. Stay with KUAM News for candidate conversations on Pacific matters, interviews with the gubernatorial teams, coverage of debates and forums, and live coverage on the general election night. We're your news leader, the voice of the Marianas.
We're back right again, and real quickly, Juan Carlos, we're running out of time, but I want to get your thoughts on how Guam is going to leverage, if at all, these compact negotiations, which Washington is paying attention to.
Yeah, I actually think that we need to look at Medicaid, Medicare funding, make sure that that's included into some of the conversations. One of the big efforts that Congressman San Nicolas and us on the Republican side were able to achieve was the increase of the Medicaid cap to 190 million. It's about to go for expiring this December, so we need to make sure that we are successful in renewing that effort. We also, but the agreement to get that increase was the inclusion of the COFA citizens into it. And so it gives a little bit of an issue there. But we need to manage expectations. The ambassador has stated clearly that compact infant funding is not part of the Compacts of Free Association, and it won't be negotiated, it won't be part of it. It's something that we need to find a way to work with our next congressman in moving forward.
Which we've been trying to do for quite a while because we find that the compact impact funding is very sorely lacking. Unfortunately, gentlemen, we are out of time. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you again next week on The Hub.